Hi, everyone. It is Jaime Jill Wright here at Madlit Musings, and I am super happy again to have Leslie Gould with us here to talk about her new release. Yay!
Oh, it's so nice to be here,
It's so
Jamie.
great.
It's
It's
always
so
good
great
to
to have
talk
you.
with you.
Yes. And your new release is called This Passing Hour, and it just came out this week. So, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
No
Yep,
problem.
big release week.
Isn't it fun? Release weeks are always fun. And then they're also a little bit, I don't want to say overrated, but I'll get emails from people, what'd you do to celebrate? I'm like, the laundry.
Yeah. Or edits on my next
Yes,
book.
right, right. Like this book I haven't really
Yeah.
looked at for the last year. So let me see if I can remember
Right.
what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so now we'll test your
Mhm.
memory. What is
Yes.
this passing hour about?
So I have my little cheat sheet with my
Perfect.
cast of characters. So if I glance
100%
down, that's why.
acceptable.
Yeah. So this passing hour is a dual time story. The historical thread is set during World War II in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And the contemporary thread is also set in Lancaster County, but it's from 2017 to 2018.
Okay.
And the contemporary thread is about Brenna Zimmerman. She's the middle sister of three sisters. Their parents were killed in a tragic accident 3 years earlier. Brenna struggled with depression and anxiety before that happened. For months, everybody thought her parents' death was her fault. She was driving
Ooh.
the car that rolled. So she just, has had a pretty heavy load.
Hmm.
But now it's a few years after the accident. She's, been working slowly to get her life together. She's in community college, and she finally decides she needs to start helping others. The focus has been on her for so long.
Sure.
So it's a story about her, self-actualizing,
Hmm.
coming to terms with her past, with what kind of future she wants,
Hmm.
and trying to reach out to others, even in pretty frustrating circumstances.
Sure.
There happens to be an Afghanistan war veteran in one of her classes, and then it turns out that he lives in her apartment complex. And she tries to reach out to him, but it's not easy, and she
Hmm.
really has to persevere
Okay.
through that. But thankfully, she has a friend in Ukraine who she met in Germany a few years before, who's also a Mennonite.
Okay.
And they develop a long distance relationship, which is, really a challenge for her too, because he becomes her best friend and she realizes that she's falling in love with him. But,
Hmm.
it's the age old question. Do I want to risk losing my best friend, for
Yes.
romance, or should I just keep the
Yes.
status quo?
Right.
But through all of this, her great aunt is tells her the story of another great aunt who during World War II pretty much managed the farm. So the farm
Mm.
that Brenna's grandparents now have, including POWs, German POWs who worked on the farm.
Oh,
So that story is just a story of a strong woman, meeting huge challenges,
yeah.
and also working for the Red Cross during that time.
Okay.
So it just, ties in these two very different women, but challenges that they both faced in the same location,
Same location.
but
Wow.
years apart.
Yeah, that's crazy too. I've heard of the German POWs being over here in the US, but tell me a little bit more about that because how did they get here and like what created that situation where they're over
Yeah,
here working on farms?
right. So what happened was at first the German POWs went to England, but England
Okay.
quickly ran out of room and resources to
Oh,
house the German POWs. So as Liberty boats took US soldiers to Europe, they loaded German POWs. And there were also, so it was the Axis POWs, there were some Italian
okay. Yep.
and some, Japanese soldiers too that ended up in the US. But so they loaded them on the Liberty boats from Europe, brought them to the US, and they had camps all over the US. And
Right.
the POWs worked, they worked for the forestry department, they worked on farms, they worked in factories. Um,
Okay.
and over 400,000 German POWs ended up coming to the United States.
Really?
It
That
was a
many?
huge amount. And
Oh,
yeah, and they were treated really well here, much better than American POWs were treated in Germany. And
right, right.
over there. They were fed well, they were housed well, all of
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And overall, it worked out pretty well. The U.S., really followed the Geneva Convention guidelines and all
Mhm.
of that. But over 2,000 German POWs escaped while they were in the U.S., and that's a thread that I follow in my story. And the mother of so Martha is the historical thread
Okay.
protagonist. Her
Mhm.
mother came from Germany right before World War I,
Okay.
and she's always been, very pro-Germany, and
Yeah.
her daughters are actually suspicious that she's spying for Germany. So that adds, a whole nother um
Oh.
yeah, set of circumstances. And here they have these German POWs on their farm, and one especially is super contentious. They're afraid of what
Mhm.
he might do. And within those, 2,000 German soldiers, or over 2,000 that escaped, some of them were helped by US soldiers that
Okay.
were sympathetic to the Nazis. So I just had a whole lot to work with when it came
Wow.
to the historical thread. And then juxtaposed to all of that, I have a character, um, who is Claire, who was the
Okay.
historical protagonist in A
Mhm.
Brighter Dawn. Her husband Jeremiah becomes a conscientious objector
Okay.
because
Mhm.
he's not going to serve in the army.
Mhm.
So he becomes an orderly in the Philadelphia mental hospital,
Okay.
which was known as Byberry. And there's a lot of information about that. So that was just another fun thing to do in the
Yeah.
historical thread. So the orderlies who worked there, they were Mennonite, Amish, Quaker.
Mhm.
The conditions there were just absolutely horrid.
Mm.
Just people, who are just lying in their own filth, never
Mhm.
cleaned up, a lot of violence, a lot of the non-conscientious objectors who lived there, would go to work drunk just to get through the shift because things were
Wow.
so horrible. So finally, a Quaker man took pictures of the conditions there,
Okay.
and he submitted it to journalists. And at first they were like, look, we have a war going on, nobody cares about this. But by the
Mm.
time the war ended, they finally got the attention of journalists, and they also got the attention of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Okay.
And because of what these conscientious objectors did,
Mhm.
because of what they saw and said this has to change, it actually ended up being a movement to change, mental hospitals
Right.
through, and they were, called asylums back then,
Right. Right.
throughout the entire US.
Mhm.
And for the Plain community in Lancaster County, a group of those men who worked in mental hospitals
Okay.
during World War II started Phil Haven, which is a mental health clinic for Plain people. And they
Really?
started it like in the early 1950s.
Okay.
And it's since merged with another organization just in the last few years, but it still has the name Phil Haven in
Mm.
the name of the organization, and they offer mental health services. So Brenna in the story has gone to a fictitious,
Sure.
I didn't use the name
Yeah.
Phil Haven, but to a
Right.
fictitious organization with, therapy.
Okay.
And she doesn't do inpatient treatment, but the inpatient treatment they have, um, inpatient treatment where the places don't have electricity,
Mhm.
so if an Amish person needs to go there for treatment, they'll feel totally comfortable. They
Okay.
hire people from the Plain community. So just, it's,
Oh,
just really, kind of, well, just reassuring to see all the good that came out of those
yeah.
conscientious objectors and what
Right.
they ended up doing with what they saw.
Right.
So that
Right.
was, yeah, that was just a really intriguing thread to follow throughout the
Yeah.
whole story.
Yeah. Well, and it's
So.
interesting too because, a lot of people might look at your cover and be like, okay, she's Amish or Mennonite fiction, but your fiction is really in depth, and for people who love like World War II fiction, it's really a unique perspective of that era that you crisscross with a modern day perspective. So I guess my point is you're definitely not the atypical Amish writer so much as a historical writer with that perspective built in. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. What I just found, find so fascinating is that, yeah, it's really easy to think of the Amish just have these simple lives and,
Hmm.
all of that. But whenever the US has had a big upheaval,
Hmm.
they've had to face the same upheaval
Yeah.
every time we've gone to war. When there's a draft,
Hmm.
the the Amish have huge decisions to make, and one of those was after, during World War I. They were treated really, really, really awful, and a group of plain, elders and
Hmm.
leaders in the plain communities came up and they developed the civilian public service,
Hmm.
so that if there was another war, there would be an easy place to plug in conscientious
Okay.
objectors so
Okay.
that they would immediately have a place to serve. So before World War II started, when it was on the horizon,
Hmm.
they are already started ramping up the
Okay. All
program,
right.
because during World War I, there were just a lot of people who were persecuted. They were treated really
Hmm.
badly.
Hmm.
And other wars, like the Revolution Wars, so and the Civil War, plain people who didn't want to serve, they either had to pay, for someone else to serve,
Oh,
or
wow.
lots
Okay.
of them, during the Revolutionary War, quite a few Amish families moved to Canada,
Okay.
and that's how some of the settlements up there started.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
yeah.
All
And
right.
and other Amish young men decided to serve.
Mm.
There are stories through, you know through every war where
Mhm.
Amish young men just chose to join the army, or
Right. But
whatever.
traditionally, Amish and Mennonite are conscientious objectors because
Yes.
they're, I don't want to say they're anti-war, but what's their stance on
Yeah,
that?
right, they're non-resistant.
That's what it is.
So
Okay.
they're a step beyond pacifists.
Yes.
Pacifists won't fight. Non-resistant people, in theory, won't defend even themselves.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so
Wow.
and theoretically, they won't even defend their children, but I
Ooh.
don't. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't know how that plays out in modern times.
Right.
There's a story, and I'm not gonna say the first name was Jacob, last name starts with a B. I should have
Sure.
written this down. This is
That's
from
okay.
research from a long, and there have been like fiction accounts written of
Yeah.
this, and but a family early in this, Amish settlements in Pennsylvania, who the family was attacked by Indians or by
Hmm.
Native Americans,
Hmm.
and they didn't defend themselves.
Wow.
Two of the sons and the dad were captured, the mom
Mm.
was killed.
Wow.
So it's definitely well, and early in the Anabaptist churches, like in
Hmm.
Switzerland, when they were persecuted in the 1500s.
Right.
There's a story of a man, an Amish man or an Anabaptist man, escaping on the ice, and the law enforcement person chasing him fell into the ice, and he went back and pulled the man out, and then the man arrested him.
Oh my goodness.
Which is really like loving your enemy, right?
Oh, that's
I
the
mean,
epitome of
just
loving your enemy.
yeah.
Because your enemy
Yes.
doesn't necessarily renew themselves into somebody nice.
Yeah. So there just are accounts of the true non-resistant,
Right. Right.
ideology,
Hmm.
and how it has played out in history.
And now
So
that's interesting too, because you have that viewpoint, and then you bring in German POWs onto their properties. And so, from one standpoint, I suppose they were good choices to have the POWs work with because they weren't necessarily going to be filled with animosity toward the German community. Am I
well,
correct? I'm like thinking as I'm talking, going,
yeah, I think there was just fear of what the German POWs might do, but
hmm.
the truth was, so many young men were off at war,
Yeah,
and then even the conscientious objectors, their young men were off serving other places too. They were just really short on labor.
interesting.
They and farms all over the US needed the labor, and the
Hmm.
Forest Service needed the labor, and
Right, right.
just to get the crops done, and
Hmm.
fight forest fires and all of that.
And am I correct in my knowledge that a lot of the German soldiers that were taken prisoner weren't equated to Nazis? Like a lot of them were pressed into service by the regime, but they weren't necessarily holding to the Heil Hitler elements of the German army. Am I correct?
Right. Yeah, that's true. But in the POW camps, the
Okay.
Nazi officers had a lot of power,
Oh, they did.
and
Okay.
they did. And, at that point, a lot of some of the POWs, thought that Hitler would be triumphant. I mean,
Mm,
they
okay.
were so impressed with the landmass and the resources of the US. A lot of
Mhm.
those officers really thought that, there would be German fighter planes coming across the Atlantic soon attacking the US, and the Third Reich would have all the resources of the US. Um, and, there was this threat to the, enlisted
Mhm.
German soldiers, if you don't toe the line and do what we tell you to, you'll pay the repercussions when we return to Germany, or your
True.
family might.
Okay.
So there
Mhm.
was a lot of control, but there definitely were POWs who were very much against
Mhm.
the Nazis.
Right.
And even if they like weren't against the ideology and all of that, they just didn't see any hope for themselves
Mm.
within that whole regime. And there's some really interesting accounts, just good resources as far as books. There's a whole book about Nazi prisoners of war in America. That was a
Okay.
great resource.
Mhm.
There's this story, or this book by Alexis Clark, Enemies in Love,
Mm.
about army nurse, a female
Okay.
army nurse who falls in love with a German soldier. Totally true
Wow.
story.
Really?
So and he wanted to stay in the US.
Mhm.
And there are lots of stories of POWs who went back to Germany and then were able to immigrate to the US.
Okay.
I mean, it took years,
Sure.
sometimes decades.
Yeah.
But so a lot of those soldiers, right, just really fell in love with the US, and,
Mhm.
could see the freedom that
Right.
citizens had, and especially coming out of Nazi Germany.
Mhm.
Such a contrast
Yeah. Yeah.
between what life was like in the US,
Right.
and what life was like in Germany. And then, post-war Germany with,
Right.
so
Very
many
different. Mhm.
shortages, and,
Mhm.
just, whole towns that had been half bombed,
Yeah.
cities that were
Yeah.
just decimated.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah, and that was
so,
one thing that the US definitely was able to avoid for the most part was the actual
y-
war on our soil, which
yes,
is a
except for
complete
Pearl
different.
Harbor.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
exactly.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just the devastation in
Yeah.
Europe was,
Yeah.
yeah,
Great. Wow.
so
Wow.
demoralizing.
So we've talked a lot about the historical aspect of your book. So let's move into the present day then, and how does that tie into the story that comes out within the present day as she's learning about her great aunt and these German POWs, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. So the tie-in is that you have these, two women, all these decades apart, 70 years apart. And they both feel like there are these expectations on them, what they should be doing, but what
Okay.
they want to do is very different. And
Hmm.
how do you break away from those expectations? And then what if those expectations, include being there for family members? How, what's your responsibility
Yeah,
between your hopes for your future and your responsibility to your family?
those are
So
huge questions.
yeah, yeah. So they both have to grapple with that.
Yeah.
And then the connection between all of it is Rosine, who is the aunt who tells the stories.
Okay.
So she's the one family member who lived during World War II, who's still
Hmm.
alive,
Okay.
and she just acts as a bridge. And it's all of her memories.
Hmm.
It's just the whole idea with the Amish Memories series is how much the memories of our ancestors affect us and affect
Mm.
the decisions that we make. And it's not even so much, how do their actions of the past affect us? Because I mean, we only hear the stories from the past from their point of view.
Right.
So
Right.
they can be very curated stories.
Yes.
And if that's really the only way we get the information, they're definitely influencing us.
Hmm.
So just to see like what Rosine has lived through in
Hmm.
her 90 years of life, and how her memories affect these three great nieces of
Yeah.
hers,
Yeah.
and really influences the decisions that they make. And she's not doing it in a manipulative way.
Right.
She just sees their needs
Yeah.
and thinks, okay, this is the story that they need to hear.
It's so, I don't want to say strange, but it was surreal. That's the word I'm looking for. It's so surreal because when I was growing up, I was surrounded by all my great uncles who were World War II vets.
Oh,
And, my great aunts and my grandmother, as the wives of the girls that were nurses, or they stayed home and took care of the farm, or, all of their stories. And so that was just as part of my growing up. It was just one generation off from that firsthand experience. And now I look at my kids and I'm like, I'm not sure that my children have ever met a World War II veteran, and you just look at how, as life goes on and those generations progress, how important it is for these stories to get passed along. And that's one of the things I love about your books too, is because there are elements of World War II stories that you just don't hear about. When you're looking at World War II, you're not necessarily thinking Amish or Mennonite.
Right.
That's not a equation in my mind.
Right, because we just don't think about them being affected by all
No.
that. Yeah.
No.
I know I've told you this before, that my dad was a World War II veteran, and he ended up writing a book. He kind of kept a journal, which you weren't really supposed to do during the war, and then he fleshed it all out after the war while he was still in Europe. And then so 30 years later, 40 years later, ended up co-authoring a book.
Okay.
So we have all that. And then a few years later, he wrote down all of his memories from childhood. And I'm just so grateful. I mean, he wrote down like how much rent was and how much a gallon of milk cost. I mean, so he had an amazing memory, because I can't remember any of that stuff. But I really hope one of my siblings will write down the history of our childhoods.
Right.
Because that's so much work.
It is.
But I just think writing nonfiction is so much harder than writing fiction.
Oh, 100%. 100% agree with you on that.
I guess I'm lazy. But
I just want to make things up.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, I'm the youngest of four. We were all born in 5 years, so we're really close together. But like, my older sister has such a great memory, like the things she remembers. I'm just like, okay, like, you read the book. But I'm so thankful that he wrote both of those accounts. And I hope that, that we all keep doing those sorts of things for our kids and grandkids, because nobody's going to have our texts.
No.
Who knows how long social media will last?
I don't know. It'll probably be saved in a vault somewhere that gets hidden. And then, 150 years from now, they'll be on the quest to find the hidden social media files. And they'll have like television shows about that. Anyway, I digress. But
but I have, in the story, I have these old fashioned scrapbooks, with the black paper and the sticky corners. And my dad, we have his scrapbooks from World War II and after. And I just, really, really treasure those.
I have 4 years of my grandpa's letters that he wrote to my grandma during the war.
Nice.
And I've made it through some of them, but now I'm at that point where I'm thinking these are over, they're on their way to almost 100 years old, really, when you think about it. We're 20 years off.
They're 80 years old.
And I'm looking at that and I'm like, how do we preserve these letters? Because they're just on paper, and half of them are written in pencil, and they're just gonna fade over time. So I'm just like, I don't know how to preserve all this.
Well, in your spare time,
in my spare time, I'm gonna transcribe this.
See, that's one of the things that Dad did. He started out transcribing all of the letters, that he wrote, and that his parents and sister and everybody wrote to him, and aunts and uncles. And then he did his journals, and it is just wonderful to have all of that.
Well, maybe I'll have to do that, or else I'll, I homeschool my kids, so this might be their typing class here. Here, for typing class, you're going to transcribe 4 years of letters.
And just think of everything that they'd learn from that.
That's not a bad idea. Right. You may not be their favorite author when I tell them you gave me the idea. But...
well, I might not be anyway, so it's worth it.
I love it.
Oh.
Okay, so this book is the second in the Amish Memories series,
Mhm.
correct? But you don't have to necessarily read them in order, or do you?
Yeah, you wouldn't have to, but it would help.
Okay,
Yeah. I mean, I
okay.
don't, rely a lot on the backstory of the others, but it definitely would help to
It
read
does
them in
help. Okay.
order.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
good to know too, because I'm one of those people like if there's a tie-in, I like to read it in order. But then sometimes
Yeah.
I know that the ties between books in like a trilogy or something is just the location and then all the characters are
Right.
different. So,
I'm doing that with my next series. They you can, you'll be able
okay.
to read them in any order and there won't be any connecting characters. So yeah, I like doing it both ways. But
That's fun. That's fun.
yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
mix
Well,
it up a little.
this is called This Passing Hour, and it is out now. So you could go ahead and get it. And if readers order it from Baker Bookhouse, they can still get 30% off and free shipping. So that's still probably one of your least expensive places to get it. And you're also
Yeah.
supporting a brick and mortar bookstore. Yay.
Yeah, definitely best deal.
Yeah,
Yeah, Baker Bookhouse, definitely.
wonderful. And if readers
Yeah.
want to follow you and get to know you, and because you have a lot more books available than just this one.
Yes. Yeah, this passing hour is my 45th book. And then I have,
That's
some
amazing.
novellas too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah.
That's so exciting.
So yeah, but yes, follow me, hop on over to lesliegould.com.
Okay.
And then, you can follow me on Facebook,
Mhm.
Instagram, all of that. I send out a newsletter, monthly newsletter. I do lots of giveaways of my books and other people's books. So
Awesome.
definitely sign up for my newsletter and, send me an email if you have any questions. I will answer it soon. I mean, I try to do it within a day, but sometimes it's a week if I'm on
I
deadline.
know. And I found
And
lately
then
I've
I
been,
feel bad,
yeah. Are you, I don't
but
know if
it'll
you're like me.
happen.
I hope not, but I found that I've started to answer emails via ESP. Like I reply in my head.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, oh, wait, that never
Wait, I
actually
didn't do
sent.
that. Yeah.
Oh, fun. Well,
But
Leslie,
yeah.
it was so fun having you here today. And I look forward to having you back on book 3.
Oh,
So
great. Thank you so much, Jamie. I really appreciate what you do a lot.